Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started. We're going to start with House Bill 902 with sponsor only. Delegate Grice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You can thank me later. Yeah.
So I'm going to thank you right now. And I'm going to thank the rest of the committee sincerely, and in particular, Senators King, Zucker, Quarterman, and also the staff for adding this bill to this hearing. And I know you guys have had a busy day, and I'll be very, very brief. And we did have a panel over on the House side, but again, out of respect for your guys' time, I'll just testify as a sponsor only on this one. And I also want to thank the press for being here too to report on this important bill as well. I thought that the camera would be pointed in that direction because I know what they're waiting actually for, but anyhow. So House Bill 902, it moved out of the House Appropriations Committee unanimously, and on the floor it was 125 to 2 vote. The bill, what it's going to do is it'll allow for our Head Start programs. They're operated by our nonprofit community action agencies to receive state funding. And if you look at the fiscal note, you'll see that DLS has not identified any conflicts at all, either with the state or our federal Head Start programs. And they went into a lot of detail to explain that. And so the passage of this bill and state funding for our Head Start programs, what it'll allow them to do is they'll be able to take additional students. And as you all know, under the federal program, they can only take students up to 120% of poverty. And in the blueprint, we have a requirement for 300%. So if this does become law and our Head Start programs do have space, they'll be able to take on those additional students. And if they don't have the space, the difference between our LEAs and our federal Head Start programs is that they have the flexibility to be able to find commercial space anywhere and very quickly turn that over into classrooms. And as you guys know, our LEAs, our schools can't do that. They have to go through the school construction process, which is very difficult. Our Head Start programs also have the logistics already in place. They have the buses. The counties that I serve, MRDC has 3 out of the 4 counties, the Maryland Rural Development Corporation, and they're already moving forward, hoping that this bill will pass. They've already given all of their teachers and instructors raises, so they're at the $60,000 level already, and they also have a tuition reimbursement program in place that they've been working for the last 12 months on as well. So at least for 3 out of the 24 jurisdictions, we already have a Head Start program that's certainly well on their way.
This looks like a good bill. Any questions?
Oh, okay. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Is Mr. Lukey here? Oh, there you are. Yep, let's do it. And Mr. Cross. This is House Bill 1524, racing facility ownership and construction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you all. Thank you for this hearing and for consideration of the bill. May 27th, 1873 was the first running of the Preakness Stakes. Senator Elfreth is laughing because she knows how much of a history nerd I am. For 150 years now, it has been an icon of Maryland, and it has been raced through that history at Pimlico Racecourse in Baltimore City. It is one of the most iconic things we have in the state. And for many people in the rest of the country, they may think that horse racing is just the Preakness in Maryland, but it's not. As you all know, as the members of this committee know through many years of bills related to this industry, the horse racing industry contributes enormously to the economy of the state of Maryland. It is part of our DNA as a state. We have more horses per square mile than any state in the country. It is part of who we are. It's also an important economic driver. And you may see that or not, depending on your district. But I will tell you, even in my district that I represented in northern Montgomery County, there were ancillary benefits of the horse racing industry for the Montgomery County Agricultural Reserve. And that's true in rural parts of the state across most of our counties. This bill, which is the product of many years of hard work by the members of this committee, by many stakeholders in the industry, and in particular, the hard work of Chairman Greg Cross, who is a volunteer who stepped up at the behest of the governor to run the Thoroughbred Racetrack Operating Authority, which was created by the legislature last year. Greg and his team have come up with what I believe to be one of the best plans I've seen to sustain horse racing in Maryland over the long term. It is complex, as these horse racing debates always are. But the fundamental question that we have to ask is this the right plan right now? And on behalf of the governor of Maryland, who unfortunately could not be here because we have a special guest in Baltimore at the moment, I'd like to ask for a favorable report on this bill and turn it over to Chairman Cross.
I hope to be as artful and articulated as Mr. Lukey. I want to begin with a thank you too, particularly. I know the session's been long and you're at the very end and you're trying to put through, consider our important legislation at the very last minute. And I thank you for your time and for your attention to this matter. I want to pick up on the history lesson. It's true. The point I haven't made in these talks before so much is the condition of where we sit now. We passed legislation in 2020, we passed legislation in 2022. Both failed, but we were passing that legislation because the condition of our facilities is completely dilapidated. In Pimlico, for example, half the track has been condemned. Not the track, but the grandstand has been condemned. It has no elevator. It has no kitchen. Much of the remaining pieces date from the original track, or they're 60 or 70 years old. And Laurel, where we're going to be housed for a few years, isn't really in any better shape. Most of it, because I represented Medco before I got this job, and I had property condition reports performed, and it was pretty poor. I mean, it dates from 1917 and when the track was originally formed. And the situation's dire, and this legislature has looked at it every 10 years since the 1970s. And we've put a Band-Aid on it and put a Band-Aid on it, and with the best of intentions, kept going and kept going. In 2020, the legislature authorized $375 million to solve the problem. The plan failed. The plans that were put in front of you were way over budget. They were 160 million at a minimum over budget, 300 million plus on the worst case scenario. In 2022, you asked them to try again. And last year you formed our organization and said, take a fresh look. So we did take a fresh look, and we have a plan that will meet the capital budget. The plan that we recommended was to concentrate racing at Pimlico and not build 2 tracks, but build an augmented training center to house the additional horses that we need. The plan that we recommended, we termed Pimlico Plus, because we thought not only build the track, but also supplement the community aspects of the Pimlico project. So in this proposal, as opposed to what you saw in 2020 and 2022, we're envisioning a hotel constructed by BDC at the track. It's shown on the plans. We're envisioning a parking garage that we hope to work out the details with Lifebridge Hospital that can supplement events for the community that will be held in the infield at the track and help the hospital as well. We're proposing, as opposed to what was enacted in 2020 and 2022, 365 days of economic activity at the track. Previously, it was just going to be a couple of weeks. We're proposing a 1,000 person event space at Pimlico, so we can start to host. It can host major events like proms, like it used to, which it hasn't done in years because it doesn't have a kitchen, so it'd be very difficult to do. And we're trying to look at creative ways to use the facility as well. For example, there's some demand perhaps for a kosher kitchen there, and I've been in contact with people to explore those sorts of things. But we have tried to reach out in the plan that we've proposed to maximize the dollar investment so that we're not just investing and fixing what is a lot of history, but doing the best that we can for the community within the 4 corners of the facility that we're building. We announced that plan in January, but we still didn't have an agreement with the current owner. And my agreement with the leadership was that we wouldn't bring forward any legislation until we had such an agreement with the current owner. We now have a binding agreement with the current owner, subject to this legislation passing, completion of our due diligence, and the Board of Public Works approval. That means that if you pass this legislation once and for all, there will be a path forward. It won't be a false start. We've estimated the cost with the architects. We've had the Maryland Stadium Authority review those costs. We will be on budget. We've also recommended that we take over day-to-day operating control of the horse racing industry. And we've been given all of the Stronach Group's day-to-day numbers, and we've spent extensive time modeling those so that we know that in year 1 and year 2, which will be the worst, the ones at Laurel, that we will run at a profit. And I've promised to the House, and I'll make the same promise here, we were not going to come back for a dollar of operating money. We will live within our means. That's what the horsemen have pledged to do. If they run short of the profit that we project, then it'll have to come out of the purses and we'll have to balance the books in the not-for-profit that we're creating to run it. And so that's the path forward. I think that I will say this to echo what Mr. Lukey said. If we don't do this now, we're at an end. There won't be another agreement. There won't be a path forward. It's just this is the last chance. And so here we find ourselves down to, I think it's a tradition that the horse racing bills get passed on the last day of the legislature. So I'm hoping that we follow that model. So that's what brings us here today. I'm prepared to answer any and all questions with as much detail as I can offer, but I think I've given enough of an overview. You're pretty familiar. What questions can I answer?
Thank you. And thank you for coming. I wanted to, I've got a couple questions, but I wanted to start with just explaining to me, how does this affect the difference between thoroughbred and standard bred racing?
It doesn't affect it at all. So there are 2 standard bred tracks, Rosecroft and Ocean Downs. They're funded by a portion of VLT money, and that VLT money will not change. And if Rosecroft were to close, the VLT money that's at Rosecroft will move to Ocean Downs. There is something called RIFRA funds, which are available to improve the tracks and just the tracks. Those monies are captive to Rosecroft and the track at Rosecroft. And what we've asked in the legislation is that the accumulated but unspent RIFRA funds at Rosecroft, which is about $4 million, $4.5 million, move over to Laurel to help us with capital expenses at Laurel. The Stronach Group has no intention of spending that $4.5 million at Rosecroft, so they're sort of orphan funds. And then on a going forward basis, a portion of the RIFRA, which would accumulate at Rosecroft, be dedicated to pay interest on the debt, which is about $1 million a year.
So help me with these orphan funds. There's money that was raised or put aside for standard bred racing that they're not going to be able to utilize?
It's money put aside to improve the Rosecroft racetrack.
So there are 2 accounts to think about here. One is the purse dedication account, and one is the RIFRA, the Racetrack Facilities Renewal Account. The purse dedication amount dollars, should Rosecroft ever close, those dollars stay with the standard bred industry. And presumably because Ocean Downs, the other standard bred track in the state, is very successful and doing a great job, those funds would head over to Ocean Downs. The RIFRA dollars were sort of assigned to facilities. So, it's less clear what happens with, should Rosecroft ever close, with the RIFRA dollars. And under this proposal, a portion of those dollars then is used to help fix up Laurel for those couple of years where racing will be run at Laurel while Pimlico is being redeveloped.
So when we talk about Rosecroft and just Rosecroft Raceway, was there thoroughbred racing there at Rosecroft?
I don't know if there was historically, but as long as I've been involved in these conversations, it's been a standard bred track.
So that money was specifically designed for standard bred.
It was the RIFRA money was specifically assigned to Rosecroft
For standard bred racing?
Well, there is standard bred racing at Rosecroft.
Right. Clear.
So that's one way to look.
So I guess what you're trying to say is that there was money also assigned for Ocean Down.
Correct.
And there were 2 separate pots.
Correct.
From this perspective.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And is the money that's assigned there that would be orphaned, would that money go to a track with standard bred?
Under this plan, that portion of the money would be used to support the plan to restore Pimlico and the temporary racing at Laurel, which are thoroughbred tracks.
That's what was going to be my question. Is there any standardbred racing there?
At Laurel and Pimlico, no.
Okay.
I also want to say this, though, the accumulated RIFRA at Ocean Downs and the money that is currently budgeted to go an additional RIFRA to Ocean Downs will support $28 million of investment at Ocean Downs. So that money, which we don't change at all, $28 million will be available to support. They'll have to spend $28 million to use all the RIFRA at Ocean Downs. And currently, the only thing that's submitted to my knowledge is $500,000.
And our expectation is that Ocean Downs will utilize their RIFRA as they go through the continuing plans there. They're running a great track. It's a great track and a great casino that I think we're all very proud of.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. One last point. Is the state going to be on the hook at all for any of the operating costs to operate Pimlico?
We're going to own Pimlico, but the operating costs will be run by the
Why
not-for-profit.
don't you start by defining we?
So the way the structure will work, the MTROA or its successor, because we will sunset, will own the actual physical land and will ground lease it to the operating authority, and the operating authority will be responsible for all the operating costs out of its budget. And that's included in the statement that we're not coming back for dollars.
So is that the same agreement that they had in New York with that nonprofit that is seems to be what we've done? We sort of modeled this after, where they come back for operating every year.
So New York has the same structure. It doesn't have the same mindset. So they're very successful, but they run the. I can't really. I don't want to criticize our neighbor, but they don't run it necessarily to maximize the profit is the way it's been relayed to me. That's not the way we're setting this up.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've had this conversation for a lot of years. I think I came in the same time Mr. Lutke did. And there has been this back and forth between the thoroughbreds and the standardbreds. That's been the conversation every single year. And I guess I need to know, is there any money at all that's being taken away from the standardbreds to do this plan?
I think it's a matter of perspective. I think there's a little bit of disagreement on that point. I would say this, first of all. I think we should not think of this as standardbred money or thoroughbred money or money going to any particular jurisdiction. This is taxpayer money, right? It's money that we have made a commitment as a state to invest in keeping this industry going. And the question is less about getting caught up in the internecine discussions within the industry than it is, how do we use this taxpayer money to maximize benefits for the economy and the people of the state of Maryland? We are fully committed to this plan to restore Pimlico to its glory, to support any transition that happens at the other tracks, and to support Ocean Downs as they continue their work as a major economic driver on the lower shore.
Another question. I've been in touch with Ocean Downs and listening to their plan for the extra racing days they're going to have to do. They're going to have housing for the jockeys because of the fact that they'll be more in colder weather, and they're going to have to be able to house them. They're looking at a pretty sizable amount for their capital project there. I just want to see for sure that the thoroughbreds and the standardbreds are both going to be able to function well and not just have the standardbreds pushed to the side.
Absolutely. That is not at all the intent. We want both industries to be successful. And, I think there are options we need to consider for how to do that. I mean, for example, the existing RIFRA funds that are already sitting in an account that are dedicated to Ocean Downs, it might be worth considering whether to provide Ocean Downs with more flexibility in how they spend those funds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again for the presentation. I wanted to back up to a question, I guess, that the chair was asking earlier, articulated the we. And you talked about we, I guess, being the organization, and you alluded to, a nonprofit. And I guess, can you just walk us through that process? I know on the bill, it talks about, the Thoroughbred Racetrack Operating Authority, which I guess is the we right now. And it talks about a nonprofit, but it doesn't discuss anything about who that nonprofit is, how it's set up, who it's going to be, all that kind of stuff. If you could just elaborate a little bit on that.
I'm often too loose with my pronoun references. So the MTROA is the organization that I'm the chair of.
Mhm.
That organization will own the assets and will enter into and control the not-for-profit through a ground lease. And when I say control, put bumpers around it and say, this is what we want you to do. And you have to come back for approvals. Think if you're familiar with the commercial real estate world, it's sort of the same. If you have a ground lease, you have to go back to the owner of the building to make major changes. We're going to create a 501c4 entity, which is not-for-profit entity performing a state function, which will be isolated as its own entity. So it will be separate from this. It's not a state agency. It will be a standalone entity that will have its own managing board, its own chief executive that will run day to day.
Who fills that board and finds the executive and all? How does that part happen? Because
That'll be our task over the next 12 months. We've hired someone now to operate as an interim person. Corey Johnson is helping us on an interim basis. He has experience he's set up 4 racetracks in the past. He's brought on as a consultant. We have Craig Jagoric behind us, who's been working with the Stronach numbers, who's going to help us work through the numbers. But then we're going to identify candidates to populate that board. We'll have to hire a new CEO to run that entity.
Mhm.
And that entity then will take all the employees, all the contracts, all the responsibility for administering day-to-day racing. They will take the operating costs. The MTROA will sit, after the facility is built,
Mhm.
which the MSA is going to lead the way on. I mean, they'll be building for us. The MTROA will be pretty passive entity. It will, the operating entity, which will be one
be
step
this
removed from the
nonprofit.
state, will have the responsibility.
Okay. I appreciate some of that clarity. Another thing I wanted to follow up on when Eric started out and talked about the history of the Preakness, something like that. Who owns, I guess, the rights to the Preakness right now?
The Stronach
The
Group,
Stronach Group.
Maryland Jockey Club, but it goes up to the
Right.
Stronach Group.
And so will they continue to own those rights even during all this transition and everything that happens? Like, well, does the state get that back? I mean, the Preakness is Maryland.
Right.
Sounds like we don't own it.
So the way this is set up,
Mhm.
we will have a perpetual license. We will pay a license fee.
Mhm.
We can opt out of the license fee after 10 years, and we can opt out of it any 5 years after that, but it will go on in perpetuity as long as we want it to go, and we will pay a license fee. And as long as we pay that license fee, the state has absolute control, unfettered. It's a very, very touch-free license agreement.
Well, when you say control in perpetuity, you're talking about, just for clarification, that the state needs to pay the Stronach Group. Is that correct? In perpetuity for the rights to an event that the state has created and is historical.
Well,
asset of the
we're
state.
gonna pay out of Preakness proceeds. So now we get
No, I understand that part. It's just I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around.
Yeah, Senator,
How do we get the Preakness
It's
back? You know what I
a
mean?
fair question.
Right.
This is a private entity that owns the intellectual property.
Understood.
The alternative would be to purchase the intellectual property directly, which
Right.
is extremely valuable
Mhm.
and probably beyond what the state is
Well, it's only
currently.
as
willing to
valuable though
invest.
as the asset is of the facility to have the Preakness. I mean, if we don't build Pimlico, there's no Preakness. So the Preakness, that asset really isn't worth a whole lot at that point. So I guess basically you have answered the question, so I appreciate that. I just was hoping there was some way we could capture that back through this process. So
I mean, as Mr. Lukey said, we would have had to write a big upfront check, and I think that we're pushing the appetite of the legislature given the current ask. So.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Good to see you again for like maybe the 5th time or so. I do remember being a part of this process, in the past, when I was in the other chamber. Another great opportunity for us to get Pimlico going. And in that last process, what occurred was a displacement of a training facility in Bowie, which is in Prince George's County. And secondly, I think a year or so ago, we passed a piece of legislation preparing for the standardbred transfer over to Ocean Downs, which all makes sense. As far as we know, Pembroke Rosecroft is still pending sale. So I have a couple of questions regarding that. One, if Rosecroft is sold and the new owner of Rosecroft wishes to provide or to keep that standardbred racing there, what happens to the RIFRA funds? So you stated this piece of legislation states that the capital dollars that are there for the facility are going to be transferred over to Laurel. So what would happen if the new owner comes in and wants to keep standardbred at Laurel, at Rosecroft, which is currently still racing, by the way?
I think that would be a question for future legislatures. I think our understanding of the reality is that the track is not likely to be sold to another operator who wants to continue racing there. And, you know, there was some discussion a couple of years ago of a potential redevelopment there. I think, you know, there is a larger question for the county, should racing end there, of what happens at the site. I think the state should stand in support of whatever conclusion the county comes to, the community comes to, about what's the best and highest use of that land.
Thank you for that. That was part of my next, actually, that was gonna be my next statement, because we do have a plan for that going forward. My question still remains, even though you don't know whether the person or the entity coming in has ideas on keeping a standardbred racing environment there, what if they do? What if a new buyer comes in? Then what?
I think at that point, we'd have to take a look at we'd have to take a look again at what to do with the funds that the legislature has allocated to the racing industry.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I might. So right now, there are RIFRA funds that are there for capital. 2 years, we mentioned today, 2 years. I think yesterday was mentioned maybe 2 or 3 years, but there are 2 years worth of funds, capital funds, that are sitting there at Rosecroft. There are plans if in the future to do something with that site, if standardbred is not going to be there. We in Prince George's County have a concern that those capital dollars are going to leave to go to build up Laurel by someone who has a little bit more money than that facility has. And with no assurances of what happens at that site once that occurs. So, you know, as this bill makes its way through, you know, the bill process, you will see some proposals from the Prince George delegation regarding those dollars going forward. But I'd like to hear, you know, from a timeline standpoint, what occurs with the Bowie racetrack. And we know that training facility was closed and it was handed over to the city of Bowie and to Bowie State, but there are concerns about the viability of that land, and then to the Rosecroft piece on the RIFRA dollars.
So let me start first of all by saying, you know, we went through this process when Bowie stopped being a training facility a couple of years ago. I think the commitment of, you know, the MTROA, if I could speak for Greg here, but certainly the commitment of the administration is whatever happens at these sites, we want to make sure that what happens is driven by the community, the local elected officials, the county, the folks who are on the ground. Under current law, the Bowie site is scheduled to go over to the city of Bowie and to Bowie State University. Under this plan, under the Pimlico Plus plan, there is a need for an off Pimlico site training facility. Bowie could be one of those sites, but ultimately, I think, or one of the potential sites for that training facility, but ultimately, I think it's got to be a question for the county and for elected officials that represent the county, what you want out of that site. And our commitment as an administration is to make sure that you all get what you need to put these sites to their highest and best use.
That's great to hear. About the Rosecroft piece.
So, can you repeat the Rosecroft question? Because I was lost in the Bowie
Well,
thought.
we're going to be tied up in the Rosecroft piece for a while because that site is in operation every day. And if that site leaves and those capital dollars, obviously, we know that those capital dollars, the allowance for those capital dollars were halted by the current owner because they had no plans of maintaining the site, although the site is still open. And so that has an impact in Prince George's County.
So
Um,
I can't, now I remember the question, so I
Gotcha.
can, the current bill legislation is drafted so that only if they close it as a harness facility, that the money, that the additional accruing going forward RFRA goes to pay the debt service, which I think is anticipated. I think that's the practical reality. But that sort of picks up on, you know, does somebody want to run a harness race there? I'm not sure that it talks about what the successor owner says, but it talks about the only transfer is with the accrued and unspent, because there are real capital needs we're aware of at Laurel, where the property owner, which is the Stronach Group, and that the MTROA was going to be the tenant, have a need for those funds that we need that money to transfer. The going forward piece is tied only on the closure of it as a harness track.
Understood, Mr. Chair, if I might, sorry. So going forward, I certainly understand that. However, the unspent dollars that are there, or the dollars that weren't allowed to be used there was still impact to that community. And we feel, that for the owner to take dollars that the current occupants were not allowed to use, and then take those dollars and then move it over to Laurel, what does that do for that site there? We have an idea that those capital dollars could be used for something to help from an economic development standpoint at that site.
So the RFRA funds, which goes to the answer that was previously announced, but talked about at Ocean Downs, they only allow use at the track. So they're only funds to support racing. They're not more broadly available to be used for other purposes. And so
As legislatively defined, as we talked about earlier, it was mentioned that, Ocean Downs there may be a way for Ocean Downs to have some broader use of those RFRA funds. And why not? Same thing for Rosecroft.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that question is that the Thoroughbred Racetrack Operating Authority is not charged with determining the future of a standardbred site. It's not in their charge as an organization. But I think you raise very valid questions. And I'll say, first of all, I grew up near Rosecroft. It's the first horse track I ever went to. It's got tremendous history. It is sad, I think, for all of us that it might close, but it's also, I think, a chance for Prince George's County. In a couple of ways. One, as a racetrack right now, that site is taxed as agricultural land. So the county actually gets relatively little property tax revenue from it. If something else happens on the site, that would change. But I think the question becomes then not so much about this money, which is money that has been sort of set aside by the legislature for racing, but about if there is a future economic development opportunity there, how do you invest in that? And that brings up a load of questions about, for example, are there funds that could come out of the National Capital Economic Development Fund, the NED fund, which would help to support any redevelopment that occurred there? I think there are a lot of different directions we could look to answer that question. We're committed to that conversation.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'll end for now on that, what you just said. We're talking about supplemental opportunities, and that includes those funds that have sat there. We are not satisfied with someone having those dollars restricted for a number of years, and then to take those dollars outside of Prince George's County and put them at another facility. Standardbred, those dollars are going to a thoroughbred facility. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple questions, Mr. Cross. One of them was, you talked about the nonprofit. Could you speak to what you believe the community's role is in a nonprofit that's being created?
The not-for-profit is going to be primarily a horse racing, it's a horse racing entity. It's not, for example, something that would be in my wheelhouse, the day-to-day running of a racetrack. I think that the not-for-profit as it operates at Preakness, as it operates at Pimlico, is obviously going to be intertwined with the community. I mean, there's no way around that, because to the extent we're having events there and we're having festivals there, it's going to have to interface and work with the community. And I mean, there have been suggestions about whether the not-for-profit will be, you know, involved in contributing to the community. And I think that is all on the table. And I've said yesterday, you know, this isn't going to work unless it's a completely integrated project, integrated with the community and integrated with the horsemen.
I agree too. So the piece about you talked about a point person has been brought to the equation. I think you said his name was Corey Johnson.
He's just a consultant.
He's
But
the consultant.
he's working as our year to consultant to help us set it up.
So how do you envision as the makeup, the expertise of this board, and how do they consult, or how do they work with? Like, what's the component to where maybe there's community folks that's on the board? Can you help us see that a little bit more clear?
We have community input on the MTROA board. The MTROA is the place to really have that kind of input. The entity is going to be a very much functioning operating entity. You know, like, what are the race dates? What are the per states? What time are we setting it up? What are the rules? That's the kind of thing that they're going to be. How are we paying the jockeys? How are we doing the racing office? The community aspect, we have those people on our board now. They're non-voting people, they're non-voting members, but I think to address that, the place to address it is in the composition of the MTROA board.
Yeah. So let's stick with the not-for-profit though. So with the not-for-profit, and they're making important decisions in reference to the operations of the specific facility, can you speak to how that'll be communicated out to the legislature, the community, the public? Because I think that Mr. Lukey said it perfect. At the end of the day, it's still taxpayer dollars.
So we're going to control it. So that's the kind of thing you put in this ground lease, right? So we're going to control it, and I'm going to have to come back and report it. So the MTRA is going to be responsible for the general operating structure, how they're working with the community, how the event space is opened up. All that needs to be embedded into the ground lease, which we have not started to draft yet, but all those things need to be reported. And then that's the thing that should be coming up at my annual meeting, in addition to, you know, did you hit your budget? You know, how did these things work out? What were the terms of the ground lease that's being set up? Because that's where we maintain the controls. I don't think that we want people without horse racing backgrounds into the nits and the gnats of how they're running the track. But we definitely want the community to have a big say in, okay, we've got this event space. How's it being made available? Who's using it? When can we have festivals in the infield? How exactly is this parking garage working? What is the hotel looking like? All of those things. What are the checks on the workforce housing? Those are all the things I stand responsible for when I come back, because that's an MTROA responsibility.
So I'm going to make a comment, and I'm going to move to the next set of questions. Okay. When I look at it, I see the not-for-profit within the bill, but I don't see any type of framework, any type of vision. I don't see the reporting requirements that kind of help us, the legislature, the community, the public, move in sync in the same direction that you're going. I just don't see that within this scope right here. The second component I'll move to is just capital. So there's going to come a day where the facilities built, the facilities moving in a great direction, and we know from a historical context that past owners or past situations that the property went derelict, it went and had capital challenges and things of that nature. So help me understand, from the profits that's being made, is there a floor that you envision in reference to the capital reinvestment of that facility?
So our hope and expectation is that we will make a substantial profit off of the Preakness, and that by running things more creatively, we will decrease our operating costs. And then we have to reserve for capital improvements at the MTROA level. That money has to flow up and sit to maintain the building. And that has to come back to you all. You know, essentially, nothing's happened for 50 years, except, as you said, it's just been more derelict because there's been no incentive or cash available to make the investment. But you have the ultimate reporting responsibility, because we are a state agency and we have to come back and report. And that's one of the things we're going to report on, because we're going to own the building. Well, I say we, I keep using my loose pronoun reference, but the MTROA is going to own the building and own the track. And it's going to have to report and say, here's what it costs, here's the projectional capital, here's what we're doing for reserves, and here's the plan. And I'm gonna have to do that next spring, and I'm gonna have to do it the spring after that. And so at some point I won't be doing it, it'll be somebody else. But we're gonna have to be making those reports on an annual basis. And so when we come back, we'll have to be held to account for how we're running it, just like the stadium authority is when it owns and operates. It worked the same way.
Yep. So I know I'm gonna give you an analogy. In previous bills, when we've made a significant injection of resources into new facilities, example, our schools, there's a certain level of maintenance that has to take place with that new injection. And are you opposed to saying that there is some level of floor that goes back into the reinvestment of the capital, knowing what past history has been with the facility?
I think no is no, I'm not opposed. We have to be responsible.
I'm gonna move to the last question, Mr. Chair, if okay. So inside of, you talked about the space is going to be profitable. Significant amount of conversation has been going on around community. Help me understand, what do you envision when we talk about the profits, and what does the community role look like in that profit sharing, or what does the profit piece of it look like? And I'm a couple that with one question, because I don't want to hold too much time. But when I looked at page 9 and I looked at like the joint plan, I think that everything should involve the folks that are on the ground that are there. So when you talk about going to ask the Board of Public Works for a certain amount of dollars, getting that these certain criteria having to be approved, I can see your organization, I can see Department of Housing and Community Development, but I don't see that it would be like in consultation with the community or things of that nature. I just don't know how the communication structure.
So the bill, so there's an organization set up called the Pimlico Compact. It's 12, 13 community groups have representatives. Some of them are here. I've been at every meeting since the fall. The legislation specifically requires us to work in consultation and communication with that group. It's set up for that very purpose. And that was the way it was set up in 2020. And we've picked up that same language and put it in this legislation. So we're intending to do exactly the same thing, and there will be consultation, and the plans and designs, the stadium authority runs that through the community as well. That's just their process. I confirm that that's the way this will work.
I'll follow with that offline, but if you can ask the first question in reference to the profits that'll be made and how does the community fall within that? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. We'll get back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Been sitting here taking notes and writing questions that keep popping up as my colleagues ask questions. So I have a couple, we'll kind of go through them. So first off, so we're going to go from 2 tracks, and I'm strictly on the thoroughbred side with my discussion, so don't worry about bringing up standardbred. So we're going to go from 2 tracks, Pimlico to Laurel, to just Pimlico. How many race days are we going to be giving up?
So we actually believe that we will be ultimately, we're talking about having a partnership with Delaware that would expand the number of race opportunities, even if we shrink the number of race dates. But you should not, of course, correlate the reduction of 2 tracks to 1 with the reduction of race dates. The problem with 2 tracks to 1 is just at Pimlico, the ability to stable the proper number of horses. So we're going to have the training facility. And I point out, this is what New York's doing, because they're consolidating around Belmont, and I mean, they have Saratoga, but they're doing a training facility as well. It's just a more efficient way to run it.
Okay, so I know now we have like the spring meets, the fall meets, and I guess they go.
That's not going to effectively change. If we reduce rates to cut on costs, we'll have a supplement that fills it in.
So my only question with that is, what about the impact on the community with the amount of vehicle traffic and all of that? So I guess Pimlico will be run 300 days a year.
Well, we'll still have training. It has training there now year round.
Okay. What about the training facilities you're talking about? Are we going to keep it kind of a 1-for-1 for the amount of stalls we're going to give up, closing down Laurel?
Pretty much. We're not intending to lose stalls.
All right. So look, there's no doubt the issue is, Eric, you said it first, it's all about the Preakness. That's what all this is about. The years I've been here, we've been fighting to make sure we keep the Preakness. The tracks, it's a physical building on a piece of property. It's about that woodland vase that we still own. So you mentioned, and Senator Corderman brought it up. So Stronach's going to keep the Preakness, that intellectual property, and they'll keep so they'll own the woodland vase.
Can I interrupt you?
Yep, sure. No, please.
So all memorabilia for the Preakness and for the state of Maryland transfers to Maryland for $1 as part of this deal. The Woodland Vase will be on permanent loan. And as long as we're running the Preakness, we will have all rights to it. It can't move. And frankly, I personally would like to see it in the lobby at Pimlico.
So you mentioned the perpetual lease that we have with the Pimlico, this grade 1 stakes. And you talked about how we as a state can get out of it. What about Stronach? How do they get out of it?
If we, they have no out. So if
None at all.
if they,
I mean, that's my question. So you're saying,
as long as we pay, they can't cancel. It's a unilateral right. And and I get to this, if we cancel, then they have to run it there anyway, and they pay us a rent. And then we get a share of revenue on the other side of it. So we get to make an economic decision in 10 years, whether we want to go forward or have them run it. So we could revert to the current situation, which I don't think anybody in this room wants to happen, but that could be where we go. But the Preakness is staying here. All the legislative protections that exist for the Preakness staying in Maryland are unchanged by this agreement.
so you're saying there's no way for this
No,
Preakness to leave the state of
No
Maryland? So we
way.
won't see it in Santa Anita or anywhere else?
there's no greater chance that it could move than there was before we started down this path on the agreement. And the agreement that I struck with them in 2010 that really tied them here is reaffirmed in the contract documents.
Okay, so then why are we rushing to do this?
Because there's no money in it for them to put the money in to build the facility. The only way that we are at the very last minutes at Pimlico. The only way it's going to get improved is if we make the investment. And there are outs in the legislation if you have a crisis or you can't run the race. This building is falling down. Just be clear.
No,
I mean, we need to make the investment. And the reason we're getting it for $1 plus this licensing fee without a big upfront fee is because they don't want to put the $400 million in. And the argument in the negotiation was, if you want the state to put $400 million in, why are we just giving you all that revenue stream and not ourselves? So that was the crux of the deal. So if we want the Preakness to continue to be run at Pimlico, somebody's got to fix the facility. And the only person in the room that has the economic stake because we have the broader collateral benefit across the state is the state of Maryland. And that's the reason it is the way it is. And that's the reason in 2020, you voted $375 million to do it. We haven't changed any of that. What I wanted to, because I didn't want to be the guy who lost the Preakness, was put us into a situation where there was any out for the Stronach group to leave. We tied it up in 2000, I think it was 2010. It's been a long time, so I forget exactly which year. Those agreements stay in place. All the legislative protections that have been put in place over the years stay in place. If the state decides after 10 years, we don't want to pay the licensing fee anymore, we want the Preakness to be run, but you run it, that's what we can do. And at least you'll have a good facility. It will not be an embarrassment to the city or the state, and they'll be running it and they'll write us a small check. It won't be nearly as lucrative to the state as running it ourselves, but we can make that decision. And we can make that decision every 5 years thereafter. And if in 20 years you don't want to do it, then they run it and they still have to run it there. That's the deal we struck.
Okay. And I'm really trying to just ask questions. I'm not trying to be antagonizing here.
No, you're not. I'm just trying to show a little passion, so it's
No,
not too
hey.
boring.
So let's start young. When you answered that question, you kind of alluded that you had fear that if we don't do this, we could lose the Preakness.
If the building falls down, we can't make them run a race there. We've condemned half of it.
No, look,
I mean, that's
for
my
the
worry.
record,
I don't want to get into a
Eric
legal
said
opinion
about
here.
economic development. Nobody knows it better than myself. I used to own a feed
I
store.
know. I don't want to get into a
I
legal
sell horse
opinion
feed.
'cause
I've been
we got-
behind I've sold thousands of tons of feed at Pimlico, and I've walked those barns. I know them very well, and I know the conditions. I'm just trying to make sure that is Eric said, this is the best deal, paraphrasing, that we can get. And many times we've kind of, as you said, ironically, we're always doing this on the sine die. So we're running to the finish line to get this done because, oh my God, it's going to fall apart if we don't.
So I thought about that driving down here today from Baltimore, and it's right. It's been at the last minute, and a lot of it has been hurried. The first $375 million ask, there wasn't any sizing or work done on what it was actually going to cost. And there was never an agreement in place with the Stronach Group. So it was a kind of, we'll give you this amount of money, see if you can make it work, if it's enough money, and can you get to an agreement, and neither ever happened. In this instance, we were given this charge 9 months ago. We hired the best architect in the world. We ran those numbers by the Stadium Authority. The aggregate cost comes out within $1 million of what is allocated here, plus the cash that's available. The numbers work. I can go through them in detail, but they work. I have the Stronach Group signed every document with the attachments. All we have to do is place the state signature on it. They are locked in, and they are locked in through past the Preakness date for us to have the closing date. So it's all baked. We're here on the last day, but we're not here on the last day because we were slip shot this time. We're here on the last day because I wanted everything buttoned down before we came back, because we could not be in the same spot the next time, because nobody want to hear from me again. I probably wouldn't want to anyway.
All right.
But so this time there has been a lot of thought given. Mr. Jagorik, we have worked these numbers on the operating side. The Stronach Group has been very open book. We know exactly what the numbers look like. We're very confident as you can be at this stage with respect to the construction numbers. And the Stadium Authority has upped them with contingencies, and we're still within the budget. This time it's going to happen. We won't be back.
Okay.
Well, we'll see at the Preakness.
So how much do we owe Stronach every year?
$3 million plus 2% of a number that represents 2% of handle.
The gross handle or the net?
Gross handle in the 2 days. So it's $5.5 million if it was $23.
And that leaves you enough profit for what you have to pay out?
Yes.
And you mentioned last thing I'll say, Mr. Chairman or Chair, horse racing is tough nowadays. You're in competition with everybody, meaning casinos, lottery. Now you have sports wagering.
Right.
And I'm willing to bet some money, no pun intended, you're going to have iGaming in the next 5 years, probably. So I know how tough it is. And I could see, you said you promise we're not going to come back, but I could see in a couple of years sitting here saying, hey, numbers aren't where they need to be. With that being said, do you really have faith in that those numbers are strong enough with all that competition you have in the gaming world that you're not going to have to come back for more operating?
As long as the VLT numbers hold constant, so the purse account is constant, there aren't radical changes that would need to be made. If those fell through the floor, then we'd have to make radical changes. But what the industry is saying, the guy sitting behind me, is they're going to own it. And it's a different dynamic. It's not some out of towner or corporation coming in and they're trying to negotiate with them. Every year, it's been a crisis. Like the Stronach Group's like, we're losing money. They don't want to make the adjustments for whatever reason. And I don't, I'm not criticizing them. And the horsemen have wanted to go one direction. They might want to go another. And it's a constant batting of heads. I mean, I've watched it as the lawyer who's been in and around this. This is the path forward. They're going to have to own it. I can sit here and promise, and yeah, I guess something could go awry, but we have worked the numbers very hard. It's a profitable business. It's a marginally profitable business. But what we know in the future is I've got additional revenue streams that are going to come online in ways that we believe we can cut those costs as we get into the new facility, and we will have increased interest. I don't believe in building, you will come and betting on that, but we have modeled it at the worst right now. We're at Laurel in a decrepit facility, running it right now, and we show a profit. If we can get out of those 2 years and get back to Baltimore in a new facility where we're going to have a sports book, we're going to have a restaurant, we're going to have an event space, we're going to have other streams of revenue, and we're going to make dollars off the Preakness, which are not available to us now, then that's additive to the equation.
Okay, last question, Mr. Chair. So you're saying it's 3 million for the naming rights?
Right. And that adjusts, it's a 2.5% inflation adjustment on the 3 million.
Every year?
Yes.
2.5. And then the 5 the 2% handle, which you're saying
it's about $2 million.
The 5.5 was total between the two.
5.5 was
okay.
total.
Okay.
It wasn't 5. No, that
So it's not 8, it's 5.
All right.
With a 2.5%.
That's right. It's 5.5 all in, 5 to 5.5 all in.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. Question about the MTROA and following up on Senator McCrae's line of questioning. excuse me. You had talked a little bit about the MTROA, once they negotiated the ground lease, that sort of goes into the background on the one hand. And the other hand, you said that as part of that negotiation, that includes all of those arrangements with the community. And so do you envision that kind of, we lay out what the conditions are with the community? For example, this is wildly successful and, we build into this X% of whatever after capital needs requirements are, goes back into the community, that is sort of set in stone from the get-go, or is that a living, breathing
It could be
arrangement that continues?
It can be as living and breathing as you want. I don't know if you've ever read a ground lease, but they're about
Nope.
this thick and they're about this thick and they can make
Imagine
your
that
eyes
would
roll
put me
back
to
in your head. And
sleep.
I'm in that field and they make my eyes roll back in my head. So it's how we craft it, right? And how and what I asked is, and I just did this week, is we're pulling off the ground leases that Delmar and Naira have in place so that we can look at the way, because they had the same community tensions, Delmar in particular. And we're going to look at that, and then we're going to sit down and say, okay, we want these controls in and what makes sense. There's a line. You want it to take account of the community. You want to take account of the state's interest, but you don't want to be so in there that that Greg's down starting the races, right? So we need to figure that balance out, and we're going to work on those documents. But the community input is in, what's the structure look like? How often do we model this and relook at it because they're doing really well and we want to second guess it? So maybe we take that in similar 5-year chunks. Maybe that matches up with the ground lease, so that with the state's license fee, so that we're relooking at it and evaluating it during that period of time. Something that I don't have that concrete answer because we haven't modeled that out yet, but some sort of approach like that. But I know I represent the governor of state, right? So we need to come up with something that makes the best interest in the state while, putting a floor underneath this industry and giving them a chance to succeed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
Hey.
Mr. Chairman. And to Chairman Gazan, I just want to publicly just say thank you on behalf of myself and Senator Jill Carter. Both of us represent the community in which Pimlico sits. And, I want to be invited back, so I'll be brief and to the point with one question with two parts. Really, I know there are some community people here that want to speak as well. But Mr. Chairman and Eric, and 2 years ago, the mayor of Baltimore, as well as the community, stepped up and volunteered to contribute to see this deal through, because they believe that the success of Pimlico is a shared kind of success. And they did that by committing $3.5 million annually to making sure they support the bond. And so there's been a great deal of sacrifice on their part. I think going forward, as to Senator McCrae's point, where there's, we all hope that, this whole deal is successful. I think they want to continue in that success, as they've already made a significant down payment and seeing that it be successful. And so I hope going forward that you all would remain open to one, sharing that success, or, if that's in the form of profits, whatever, to the community and the benefits there, but also in the legislation. I know we've talked in public forum about the different community benefits, but also kind of codifying and writing out some of what that looks like, so the community could walk away to feel like they're a true partner and that they've invested all that they have in making sure this deal is successful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Of course, I am from Prince George's County. I want to talk just a little bit about Rosecroft. I want you to tell me where in this piece of legislation do we specifically talk about Rosecroft? That's number one. Number two is that you already know that there's money that's sitting at Rosecroft that was not allowed to be used. The worry that we have is that that money is going to be taken and it's going to be sent somewhere else, which is going to be a problem for that community and for us. That's number two. I'm going to give you all the questions that I have here. Number three, Pimlico does have a national reputation. The Preakness has a international reputation.
That's right.
I'm trying to figure out for the life of me. I mean, you all have been here time after time after time talking about the Preakness and the needs for Pimlico. I'm just wondering, how is it that this racetrack that generates this reputation and all the money, how did it get in the shape that it's in?
So I can act. Let me start with the last one. So when I got retained by the state to represent us when Preakness was in bankruptcy.
Okay, start with Rosecroft. The money that's there.
I'll take that then. So the Thoroughbred Racetrack Operating Authority that Mr. Cross chairs was not charged by the legislature to talk about the future of the standard bred tracks. And Rosecroft is a standard bred track. The only involvement of Rosecroft in this is that there's unused money that the legislature dedicated to horse racing for facilities renewal at Rosecroft that has not been spent and that won't be spent. And that's recycled under this bill to support other portions of the horse racing industry. It's the only reference to Rosecroft in the bill. The future, Rosecroft is privately owned. The future of what happens at Rosecroft will be determined by its current owners about, with the question of whether and whom they sell to, and by the people of Prince George's County through the planning process that Prince George's County undertakes.
Okay. Okay, got you on that one. The second has to do with Pimlico.
So when I was
It's been poured into the Preakness, from the Preakness to Pimlico. Why is the racetrack in such a predicament? Why does it look the way it looks?
So the owners, all private owners, haven't put money back into it. And then at a certain point.
Say that again.
The private owners have not put money back into it. And at a certain point, it became uneconomic to put money back into it. So what I started to say was when I was hired in 2010, when the Preakness was in bankruptcy, I actually went back because I wanted to, what's the history here? And what I saw was the beginning in the 70s, the economic investment in the track, it continued to slide. And every legislature, every 10 years would look at what are we going to do to solve this problem, because the private owners didn't have enough capital to put in. And it just got worse and worse. And the hole got deeper and deeper and deeper, and to the point that it got hopeless for a private owner to do it. And that's how we got here. So ever since that time to today, it's just completely slid to the point of condemnation. And there's not enough economic return for a private operator. They're not benefiting collaterally like we are with $2 billion of collateral economic benefit. So all they're looking at is, if I put $400 million in, what's my return on the $400 million investment? And it's too small to justify it for a private owner. It makes sense for the state, but it doesn't make sense for a private owner. And that's what they said. We had the Stronach Group come in front of they said we would make the investment only if there was a sufficient ROI, but there's just not a sufficient ROI to ever justify the 400 million. And that's how we got to this agreement where they're essentially saying we'll walk away. Okay.
Thank you for a second bite, and I'll just leave it with one bite. So the legislation provided for this organization to purchase Pimlico for $1, correct? And a thoroughbred.
That's not in the legislation. That's in the.
That's in the agreement. But
I'm sorry. The agreement, correct. So what is to prevent? Because if you're dealing with the thoroughbred, yet you're going to take dollars from the standard bred, what's to prevent the agreement from you all purchasing, since there's no investment going into Rosecroft, just purchase Rosecroft for that another $1. You're asking us for another to go up to from 375 to 400. Why not purchase Rosecroft?
It's owned by a private operator. They wouldn't sell it for $1.
Same folks, correct?
No, but they're not giving away money. The fact that they gave us the $1 was because we were willing to enter into the long-term deal.
Long-term deal for Pimlico
and the Preakness.
But not the long-term deal. So you all have no interest in purchasing a a standardbred facility which operates daily. But you are interested in taking the capital dollars to help you benefit what you're trying to do.
Senator, regardless of how the conversations with the,
If I might, I just want to hear from the folks.
It's not in my task. I would say one thing though. I mean, the Stronach Group has indicated to me that they're going to close Rosecroft. When they close Rosecroft, that money that's shifting to us goes away. It doesn't go to Ocean Downs. It goes to the state. So that $4.5 million doesn't sit there as a pot of money that's going to be reinvested. The minute they close the track, it's gone. So in this instance, we were actually making use of the funds, but I believe they're going to close the track. I mean, they haven't made a public announcement, but I think that's where it's going to wind up.
And we believe in that possibility as well. But again, you know, we're sitting at the table you're asking us to, once again, believe that this next, piece of legislation is going to be the piece of legislation. And you're asking, members from across the state who have been impacted by this entire process. Each time we go through this, from the training facility to Rosecroft, whether it's directly or indirectly. And so we are also asking, why should we support this piece of legislation if what is there for Prince George's County to gain out of this piece of legislation when we are carrying a burden of a facility that we really can't do anything with? Thank goodness the standardbred folks are still working there.
Simulcast.
But at the end of the day, it's a request. I just want to get your response to that. And thank you. Didn't mean to cut you off, Eric, but I wanted to hear from them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one quick question on something he asked that you said, and this goes back to, I was there with Senator King in Ways and Means in 2007. We did the original slots bill. I thought that RFRA money stayed with the breeds, meaning that standardbred money would stay to standardbreds wherever it went, whether it was the different tracks, and same thing with the thoroughbred. I didn't think it would go away. I thought it stayed with the breed. So if you still had a track,
I'm almost certain that it goes away.
we can check and confirm that in the statute
I'm
with you.
almost certain. I can wait if I can ask my.
No,
guru. It goes away. It goes away. Future accreting change, I think, is treated differently, but historical goes away.
okay.
Okay, any other questions? All right, we have a number of people signed up to testify. We're gonna go do our standard procedure of 2 minutes. I'm taking them just in the order. Usually we split them up in everyone fair, but they're just coming how they came in. So we're gonna start with Mr. Wise. If you'd like, sure.
I'll go ahead and start, Mr. Chairman. Steve Wise here on behalf of the Cloverleaf Standardbred Owners Association. So this is a trade association representing the standardbred industry. And just to be clear, our opposition here today is not to the goal of making sure the Preakness stays in Maryland or revitalizing Pimlico Raceway or really getting the thoroughbred industry on good footing. It is simply about the taking of the money from Rosecroft out of the RFRA and redirecting it to the thoroughbred industry. And just to be clear, sort of make sure everybody understands the background, the money in the racetrack facility renewal account is split 80-20. 80% goes to the two thoroughbred tracks, Laurel and Pimlico. 20 goes to Rosecroft and Ocean Downs. The proposal is to take 10% of that 20% and redirect it to the Pimlico Plus plan. Not only does it take the ongoing revenues that flow to that, it takes an accumulated amount of money and also takes that away. Our issue with that is it's based on a number of assumptions, some or all of which may not come true. One is that Rosecroft Raceway will no longer be a raceway. that it is put up for sale and is actually purchased, it is still, as Senator Jackson pointed out, an active raceway today. The third point is, if it does close, a number of those racing days are going to be moved to Ocean Downs, which is the only surviving track in the state. And they will need to make a number of improvements. I know Mr. Rickman has signed up. He can talk about those. But there will be monies needed for that as well. All or any of those assumptions may not come true, but they're all baked into the bill in front of you. And if you pass it as it is, you will have sealed the fate of Rosecroft, which is not yet sealed. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, Rob Garagiola with Compass Advocacy, and I'm here on behalf of two organizations, the Standardbred Owners, CSOA, as well as the Standardbred Breeders, MSBA. And I'm also here urging an unfavorable for this legislation. I feel like this is being rushed at the last minute. There were a lot of great questions that I thought were asked all around with respect to this. And what I'd like to say is the Standardbred industry is actually doing well. At both racetracks in 2023, there were record handles. The American Horse Council just earlier this year put out numbers of both the thoroughbred and the standardbred industry, the economic impact to the state of Maryland. And for the thoroughbred industry, 591 million, that's fabulous for the state of Maryland. For the standardbred industry, 284 million. Basically about a third of the economic activity in the state is coming from the standardbred industry, and the farms and all the things that were talked about with the last panel also apply to the standardbred industry. Those farms are throughout the state. And really what we're talking about here is, I don't know how many years, I heard potentially 40 years of mismanagement and lack of investment in Pimlico. Look, I'd like to see the Preakness stay in Maryland as well. But, it's a $400 million investment and probably ongoing operating costs that the state is going to have to continue to pay, plus the 3 million, 5 million or whatever to Stronach for the license each year. Of all that, you're taking 5 million, 4.8 million. It's in the fund right now for Rosecroft. And then you're taking 1.3 million next year, in the year after, in the year after. We're not talking about a lot of money in the scheme of this $400+ billion. There are other options if this bill moves forward to take it from the thoroughbred PDA account. They get 80% of that also. That's like $65 million a year. Take some more from that. So with that, Mr. Chair, would urge an unfavorable report on House Bill 1524, and happy to answer any questions.
Questions for either of these two witnesses? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Rickman, it's on virtual.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Bill Rickman. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and members of the committee allowing me to speak. As you know, I own businesses in Rockville, Maryland, Rickman Construction Company, Rickman Management, but I also was the former owner of Ocean Downs Racetrack and Casino, which I sold to Churchill Downs in 2017. Ocean Downs first opened in 1949. They now offer 48 days of live racing with over 500 races. An evening there has an average of 1,200 patrons per night. I'm here in opposition to House Bill 1542. The legislation allocating, you've heard this, of course, matching funds or RIFA from Standardbred. The important thing for you to remember is when Rosecroft closes, that doesn't do away with the horses and the horsemen. They have to have the place to race. And that's Ocean Downs. It's already in our contract because Standardbreds are thinking ahead. So at any rate, we have a major investments. A heated paddock is $15 million. So to think that we won't need that money in our breed is not correct. So I propose that you, sorry about that, my phone fell. They currently get 80%, we get 20. As you know, it immediately goes to 10. I'm hoping that you will consider not taking money from the standardbred industry because our star is rising. And we will have a lot of horses at Ocean Downs and a lot of, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Questions for Mr. Rickman? Okay, thank you. It looks like I have 3 people on here from Park Heights Renaissance. Representing them, Brian Alston, Yolanda Giggets, and Ellen Parker. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, our Senator, Senator Hayes, and all the honorable committee leaders here today. My name is Yolanda Jiggis. I'm the CEO of Park Heights Renaissance. I'm also a native and a child of the Park Heights community, and also grew up in that racetrack. I'm also a signatory of the Community Compact Agreement that everyone has been talking about, along with Mayor Young, MSA, and BDC. And I've also provided packages that include the compact agreement and some of the financial priorities that we've set for the area, including one that is near to my heart, which is a pending Main Streets designation in the area. So I'm here in support of keeping the Pimlico and the Preakness in Park Heights and the state of Maryland, since this was a project envisioned as far back as the adoption in our 2006 master plan. And it complements the commercial redevelopment plan that we have in place, again, which includes a pending Main Streets designation. However, I can also attest to the vital need for appropriate levels of resources to execute on the other 10 recommendations that are adopted in that master plan. The Park Heights Urban Renewal Project is the largest urban renewal project in this state, and we also are the largest impact investment area in Baltimore City. There are over 22,000 residents, 300 plus businesses and community-based organizations working together in this effort every day. Another point is Park Heights is already a financial partner in this project, as $40 million has been taken from our Pimlico local impact funding to support this project. This leaves a huge deficit for community-based projects. Another note is businesses in Park Heights continue to lose revenues every single year that this Preakness event happens. We continue to get feedback from the community on these concerns. So under my leadership, we've made a commitment to our legislators and residents to ensure a community benefits standard is adopted in every project, and this project shouldn't be no exception. Again, I support keeping the Pimlico and Preakness here in the state and in Park Heights, but with the inclusion of some type of specific language that commits financial contributions to a community benefits plan that will move the needle on priority projects outside of the Pimlico racetrack and surrounding areas, the master plan, and including the 1 mile radius. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, our representative Senator Hayes, for the record, Brian Alston here on behalf of Park Heights Renaissance. For the sake of time, I would just like to say, me too.
Yeah, that was cute. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Senator Hayes, and committee members. My name is Ellen Parker, proud resident of Park Heights community and vice chair and secretary of the Park Heights Renaissance Board of Directors. I've lived in the community since 1964, which is pretty amazing since I'm only 25. As a long-term resident, I've seen the community undergo many changes, both positive and negative. My work with PHR Board of Directors allows me to work diligently to make Park Heights a vibrant, thriving community. As the niece of a former horse trainer and a longtime fan of horse racing, I look forward each year to the Preakness Stakes and participating in the community events leading up to the race. I support HB 1524 and agree revitalization of Pimlico is vital to the growth of Park Heights. However, we can't ignore the development of the residential and commercial areas surrounding the race course. For some of you, this bill may seem rushed, but for me, it is long awaited. Financial support of these areas will greatly benefit from for this once in a lifetime investment. And I ask that the committee support this measure. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Questions for this panel? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have two more people signed up. Roy Randall from the Pimlico Advisory Board and Elizabeth Weissman from the Pimlico Compact Board, which I'm guessing is the same, or maybe it's not. I don't know. You can tell us.
Mr. Chair, members, and Senator Hayes. My name is Elizabeth Wiseman. I have been a resident of the Pimlico community since 1962. I'm a past president of the Silburn Community Association and am currently serving as co-chair of the Pimlico Community Advisory Board. I grew up in what once was a vibrant community. I have experienced the many years of disinvestment, and I am passionate about the much-needed redevelopment of this community. I support the Preakness staying at Pimlico, and I support House Bill 1524. However, I see the critical need for investment in the communities outside of the racetrack to include the master plan, footprint, and the 1 mile radius. It makes no sense to me that the development of the racetrack would happen in a silo while the surrounding communities continue to struggle for funding. I ask that you strongly consider including funding in this bill to support the completion of long overdue projects. The needed development in the master plan footprint has taken far too long. Thank you for your time.
Good day, Chair, Mr. Chairman, the board, Senator Hayes. I am Bishop Randall. I am the chair of the Pimlico Redevelopment Community Board. I am the vice chair of the Northwest Faith Base. I am the Neighborhood Association president for the neighborhood adjacent to the racetrack. And I also am a business owner with the Resource Center. And I tell you all of that to let you know how much I am invested in Park Heights. I raise my children there. My church, I have service is there. I do case management there. And I represent the 12 to 13 neighborhood associations that are backing this agreement, 1524. It's long overdue. Our neighbors and our residents deserve better. We've been given time after time after time again that it's going to happen, and we are wanting it to happen today, and we want it to be done right. And right meaning we want you to fund this bill, because not only will it give us a track that we could be proud of in our communities, but it will also support the families, the seniors that are in need of support for the housing, the blighted and vacant housing, the home repairs, the businesses that are there that have been trying to strive there. We need new businesses to also come in. So we're asking you to support this. We are totally behind it, but we need the funding to make this go forward. So we thank you.
Thank you. Questions for this panel? Senator Benson?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Benson.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming here this afternoon. I just listened carefully to what you all said. The Preakness has generated millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. I'm sure you heard me ask the question, how is it? How is it that the Pimlico racetrack is in such disrepair? But I just heard you say, you all say in concert, that it is not being given back to the community
Correct.
with the kind of money that is coming from the Preakness and the races and what's going on over there. Well, quite frankly, with the condition of the racetrack, very little is going on from what I'm hearing sitting here. I'm just a tad bit concerned and want to hear from you what you think has happened that has caused the Pimlico racetrack to be in the shape that it's in. Because you know what? If you go to Ocean Downs, some of these other racetracks, you don't see that. Even at Rose Grove. Can you tell me, with the kind of money that's being generated from just the Preakness alone, do you feel that more should have happened in your community as it pertains to giving back? That's what I'm concerned about.
And I know you're gonna answer as well, but if I could answer a part of the question, we weren't at the table. I wasn't born. And if I was born, it would be a different story. We are now voicing what we want and what we need. We have collectively come together. We've been educated in our neighborhoods. We've been educated on what we have and what we don't have. And now that this opportunity is here, come hell or high water, we are coming to let you know we're in favor, but you cannot forget the residents that kept it afloat while it was running. That was a private owner and they kept the money. I can't make it seem any better than that. With the state taking ownership and doing what it needs to do, and all of us coming together collectively, not only will racing be great for Baltimore, but the residents that live there will thrive. And it would be an area that would be looked upon like never before.
The question becomes, Mr. Chair, the state is not taking ownership. The state is not taking, we're not taking ownership.
MTR.
From our understanding, that is the case.
Yes.
Unless we are not aware.
What'd you say?
We're taking ownership of the property.
Of the property?
Yes.
It's the name for the race.
Yes.
It's the race. That's what I'm concerned about. The generator, the money generator. That's what I'm concerned about. Thank you for that, Mr. Senator. I appreciate that.
Senators.
Yolanda, I'm glad you came back up there, and thank all of you all for coming this evening. But I know you all have made some references that may not be familiar to this group, and I know, Yolanda, you have a packet as well. But can you all give a brief description of what you mean by the master plan area and the 1 mile radius for this?
Sure. Park Heights Renaissance actually was created out of the process of the master plan in Park Heights. That master plan was adopted in 2006. So residents, as you can imagine, have been wanting to see what was promised in that master plan, which was the adoption of 11 recommendation areas, all of which we all know that are in urban neighborhoods. Safety, the Pimlico was an explicit project in that bill, as well as commercial redevelopment, safety, open space, health, education, workforce development, training. And in the package that you have, I hope that you have, we've outlined those priorities that we've set and goals over the next 3 to 5 years to really move the needle on those projects. I started in January 2020 as a new leader, really beginning to shift our organization's role and stand up in the role that was actually conceptualized in that master plan, which was to be an organization to help advocate and move those implementation activities of the master plan. So, you know, I'll take any other questions, but that I hope you have that package that really shows that the basic quality of life priorities over the next 3 to 5 years is already in excess of 65 million, and that list is conservative. So it really shows that the work that is needed is beyond what we could ever fund. So we have really over the last 4 years been piecing money together. But what has been our saving grace has been our understanding and acceptance that we can't do any of this work without collaborative partnerships. And that's what we've been doing. And I also, you know, want to say that looking at this project, yes, it's a milestone on our master plan, but I also think it's an opportunity for this to be a national model of effective community, public, private partnership and how to leverage properly public funds with private funds so that we can fund these type of projects in a way that the community wants them done. Not one project at a time, but to activate that project in the Park Heights area and the 1 mile radius area. And the 1 mile radius defined are also our neighbors and members that live above Northern Parkway. The master plan is a defined area. It is the largest urban renewal project, as I said. It has 12 distinct neighborhoods and over 22,000 people. But our 1 mile radius is also the communities above the racetrack, which are Mount Washington, Cheswell, Glen, Falstaff. So, and we're all working together, and then they are members of this community compact. So that compact is also another great move in the right direction in these large development projects to really show that there's a commitment to have community feedback. So these are all the leaders in that immediate area sitting down together, giving their feedback, and they've been working to make sure that their vision is also implemented. And while that agreement is great, and I am one of the signatories on there along with the mayor and MSA, it is no financial commitment in that document. It is a commitment of understanding to work with the leaders and have them involved at the table. So again, when you hear that agreement, yes, it is agreement in the right direction, but I'm here to give you context because I'm doing the work every day and how difficult it is to do the work without the proper resources. So I urge again, as we consider adoption of this much needed bill to move the Pimlico and the Preakness, that you not forget that we are working to ensure that the entire area is redeveloped as was promised in the adoption of the master plan in 2006.
I just want to add that, just to put it in scope, those 12 neighborhoods represent the largest urban redevelopment footprint in the state of Maryland in scope.
And that alone lets you know the amount of resources that are needed to support effective movement on those projects.
Very good.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Craig.
Not a question, Mr. Chair, but a very brief comment. I just want to make sure that Ms. Jiggets know I spoke over here in East Baltimore,
That's
always with you too. So thank you.
Thank you. And we are all about, when we say our new motto is collaboration over competition. And we do support our projects and partners all across the city. We share ideas and give feedback because we realize that that is what is needed for all of us to actually move the same work for Baltimore City as a whole.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That concludes the hearing on this matter. We're going to vote on one bill, the bill that we heard earlier from Delegate Grice, 902. Triple E is second on it, so we're just going to keep it moving. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's it. We should be here. Oh, wait.
You mentioned that's not good.
This just in.
That's the three. Verizon.
Yep. This is House Bill 66. You may recall this was Delegate Charkoudian. It has 3 different authorizing two local communities for doing various things. What were the three things? Residential real property owned, primary dwelling, public school system. There's a break for that. Apartment buildings, for health and safety improvements, and an apartment building coming used for the purposes of local housing programs and homelessness. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that is it now. All right, the bell should be ringing any second.